These astronauts had come to Mars to complete a simple mission, but they had no idea that they would soon encounter a storm that would change their entire lives. The storm was so dangerous that the mission commander had to order them to abandon the mission and return to Earth immediately. Upon hearing this, all the astronauts quickly ran towards their rockets. That storm too, it was right above them. But before they could reach their rocket, a very heavy satellite antenna suddenly hit astronaut Mark. As soon as the satellite hit him, he disappeared right there in the middle of the storm. Meanwhile, the controller sitting inside the rocket started receiving signals that all the oxygen was leaking from Mark's suit. His team searched for him desperately, but the storm was so severe that Mark was nowhere to be found. He was nowhere to be seen. When the rocket controller informed them that Mark's suit was leaking oxygen, all the crew members desperately searched for him. Because if his suit ran out of oxygen, he would die. But because of the terrible storm, they couldn't see Mark anywhere. When they searched desperately and couldn't find him, they assumed he must have run out of oxygen by then. He must have been dead. Meanwhile, their rocket was slowly turning, and if it accidentally overturned, they could be trapped there forever. So they were forced to leave Mark alone and head for Earth. But the real story began when a few hours later, Mark suddenly opened his eyes, revealing he was still alive. But the problem was he was now covering the entire planet Mars, but he was trapped all alone. Mark slowly tried to get up, writhing in pain because a piece of the satellite antenna had pierced his body when it hit him. But luckily, blood had clotted around the piece, cutting off his oxygen supply. That's why he was still alive. To ease his pain, he somehow broke the front part of the row. When he looked ahead, there was no sign of a human being anywhere near him. Just before him was his camp, where he and his companions were staying. He immediately realized that the rest of his companions had probably left the previous night. Writhing in pain, Mark made his way straight to his camp. Once inside, he quickly took off his spacesuit and in the next moment pulled the rod out of his stomach. The pain was so intense that a painful scream echoed across barren Mars, but the trouble wasn't over yet. A small piece of the rod was still lodged in his stomach. He quickly retrieved the first aid kit and managed to remove the remaining fragment, but he was still bleeding profusely, so he took a stapler and closed his wound. The pain of the stapler hitting him sent shivers down his spine. Now it seemed the real game of his life on Mars was about to begin, as he was now stranded, completely alone in the desolate and dangerous Martian desert. The structure he had collided with was actually a communications satellite dish, and it had been completely destroyed in the storm. This meant he would no longer be able to contact his team at all, and if NASA somehow managed to find him alive, it would be impossible. Even if a signal was received, it would take a full 4 years for a rescue mission to reach Mars. That's easy to say, but staying there alone for 4 years was nothing short of a painful death. Worse, the camp where Mark had taken refuge wasn't designed for permanent survival. Now all his resources were slowly being depleted. If the oxygen system accidentally failed, his breathing would be impossible. It was impossible, and if he couldn't breathe, his life would be over. The situation was only getting worse for Mark. Fortunately, even if the camp somehow managed to hold out for a while, the food supply was still a major issue. He simply didn't have enough food to last him for 4 years until a rescue mission arrived. From all accounts, his life on Mars was doomed. It seemed almost impossible to hold on any longer. Mark began recording his final moments on his computer, as if he were writing down his final decisions. For 2 days, the storm on Mars was tearing him apart. Every moment he felt like everything would end, but then a moment came within him. He decided that he would get out of here no matter what. He made a decision. He planned to try to survive if a future rescue mission landed on Mars. The problem was that the mission was still many years away, and surviving that gap posed the biggest challenge. Mark calculated his stockpile of food. He realized that even with all the team members' food, he only had enough rations left to last for about a year, and a year on Mars. Surviving was nothing short of a miracle. He could see his death approaching. He was just as he was staring at death when he suddenly spotted a packet of potatoes. The moment he saw it, he realized he could still survive. He decided to grow all the potatoes he could find and produce enough food to comfortably survive the remaining 3 years in this place. He could survive. But growing anything directly on the barren land of Mars was nearly impossible because it required water, which was completely absent on this barren land. He decided that to survive, he would have to cultivate it. So he set about building his own small farm on Mars. First, he collected a lot of soil in a place inside the camp and gradually expanded it into a farming area. he began to shape it into a suitable habitat for planting trees. But the problem was that Mars' soil naturally lacked the nutrients plants need to grow. So Mark devised a risky plan to use astronauts' biological waste. Its stench was so dangerous that staying there for even a second was tantamount to courting death. But he had no other choice. He constantly focused on the environment. He processed the material and mixed it with soil to temporarily transform the barren Martian soil into fertile soil. He chopped all the potatoes into small pieces and buried them one by one in the soil. But the next and most difficult stage of farming was water. Luckily, Mark had a good knowledge of science. He knew that water could be produced by combining hydrogen and oxygen in a controlled reaction. It could be made. He had all the necessary equipment for this experiment, but on his first attempt, he made a big mistake. He didn't fully calculate the oxygen already present inside the camp, which was constantly depleting due to his breathing. As soon as he mixed the oxygen and hydrogen, a massive explosion occurred, shaking the entire area. Mark survived. He went, but he realized that even the smallest mistake on Mars could cost him his life. The next day, he resumed his work. This time, he used his brain, which resulted in a successful experiment. Gradually, moisture began to accumulate, and eventually, water began to form on the barren land of Mars. This water was enough for the soil in which Mark had planted potatoes. A few days later, when the first green plant emerged from the soil, when he saw it, his joy knew no bounds. Meanwhile, on Earth, NASA officially announced that Mark Watney was no longer alive. This news spread rapidly around the world, and everyone considered him a lost astronaut. He was even cremated. The next day at the NASA office, an analyst named Vincent tells the director that the satellite should be placed in the Ares 3 mission area. They should turn it around and scan it again. But NASA management rejected this idea. They feared that if the camera captured Mark's dead body, the images could be spread worldwide, and NASA feared that this could erode public trust. But Vincent wasn't one to give up so easily. Vincent sent the satellite team the exact coordinates of the 3 landing zones so that the area could be inspected closely again. When Mitty, an expert team member handling satellite operations, focused the cameras on the location, she was astonished. She noticed that some of the mission's equipment was not in its original place. Some items clearly appeared to have been moved. Most surprising was that the rover had also been moved. The same rover on which the equipment was stored. It's being moved around. It was impossible for equipment to move on its own in a desolate place like Mars. Seeing this, Mindy realized Mark Watney was still alive. She immediately called Vincent and told him that some of their equipment had been moved. It meant someone was tampering with the equipment, and it couldn't be anyone but Mark. Vincent was stunned by this news. They immediately reported this to NASA Director Alex. Initially, the NASA director tried to ignore it, saying that perhaps a storm on Mars had dislodged the equipment. But Vincent told him, "I can say with 100% certainty that Mark is still alive, and that this was impossible to happen on its own." Seeing this, even the director had to admit that Mark Watney was alive. Now NASA was facing a new problem. NASA was in a bind because the entire world had already been told Mark was dead. A memorial had even been held for him. Suddenly revealing the truth to the media would be very risky. After much deliberation, they decided to disclose everything to the media, but the remaining crew members returning to Earth in the spacecraft would remain uninformed. NASA feared that if they discovered that Mark is alive, and if they leave him alone on Mars, they might do something wrong out of grief. On the other hand, 70 days had passed since Mark was alone on Mars. By now he had found a temporary solution for food and water. But now the biggest question before him was how to get out of the desolate land of Mars. Mark knew very well that NASA's next mission, Ares 4, would land in Scipa in a few years. He was about to land near Riley Crater. But a major challenge still loomed before him. The location was thousands of kilometers from his current location. If he was to survive, he had to reach it somehow. Mark calculated that it would take him approximately 60 days to complete the dangerous journey. The mission seemed nearly impossible, but he had no other option. Neither was there, so he immediately began preparing. He had a rover that wasn't working properly, but Mark was not only an astronaut, but also a formidable engineer. He removed the working parts from the damaged rover and began fitting them into another rover. After much repair work, he had upgraded his rover to the point where it could reach the location on Mars where NASA had planned to locate it. The Ares 4 mission was about to land. Now his next challenge was not just survival, but traversing the entire planet. When he left his camp for that location, the temperature on Mars dropped so much at night that a person could freeze in a short time. If he didn't find a solution, he wouldn't be able to survive even one day, let alone 60. Then another dangerous idea struck him. Upon arriving on Mars, the team buried a nuclear power source underground to safely provide energy. This device was incredibly powerful. However, even the slightest damage could have resulted in a painful death for any human being. The risk was enormous, but Mark had no other option. He pulled the battery out of the ground and attached it to his rover. The heat from that power source began to protect its rover from the freezing temperatures, allowing it to continue its journey. Meanwhile, on Earth, NASA was also working tirelessly to save the route. They ordered the Jet Propulsion Laboratory to prepare an emergency mission, a probe that could deliver supplies to Mars. The problem was that normally such a spacecraft took several months to prepare. Sometimes it takes up to a year, but now they had very little time. NASA's entire rescue plan now hinged on this mission. Their idea was to deliver enough food to Mark via an emergency probe to enable him to survive on Mars for several years. According to the plan, when a future Ares IV mission lands on Mars, its team will return to Earth with Mark. The mission sounded simple, but it was actually impossible. The JPL team worked day and night to create a fully functional supply probe in a very short time. Meanwhile, NASA Administrator James also assigned Mindy a responsibility. Mindy now had complete control of the satellites and monitoring systems, allowing her to track every movement on Mars. People on Earth felt he thought he was dead, but in reality, NASA was watching his every breath. Meanwhile, on Mars, Marg began to reap the rewards of her hard work. All the potatoes she had grown were now ready. Seeing the greenery in the red Martian soil filled Marg's face with joy. She harvested nearly 600 potatoes. Mark set aside the larger potatoes for his own cooking, while the smaller ones were replanted back into the soil. He planted it so that he could continue farming and survive for a longer period. Using his brain, Mark had made arrangements for his future food even on the barren land. Now at least he no longer had to fear dying of hunger. But deep inside, he was torn by the thought that if he couldn't contact NASA, his survival here for so long could be in vain. He could even die, it could have been. Finding a communication system on a desolate planet like Mars was nearly impossible, but Mark wasn't one to give up. After much thought, he came up with an idea. Without wasting any time, he hopped into his rover and headed for a dangerous location on Mars, about 60 days' journey from his camp. Meanwhile, on Earth, his every movement was being monitored by satellites. Mindy and Vincent were stunned. They couldn't understand why Mark was leaving his camp and going so far. Days passed, and Mark continued moving in the same direction. The most dangerous journey of his life continued for several days on the desolate land of Mars. As he continued, the fear within the entire NASA team grew. The NASA team still couldn't understand what Mark was doing. Meanwhile, suddenly, Vincent remembered something. He quickly mapped Mark's entire route on a map of Mars and discovered that Mark was actually heading towards an old Mars probe Pathfinder. This was the same robotic lander that NASA had sent to Mars many years ago to collect data on the planet's soil. Initially, the mission was successful, but after a few years, its battery died and Earth would forever be disconnected from it. Contact was lost. Since then, the part finder had been buried somewhere in the Martian soil. So Mark set out to find it, believing it was the only thing he could do to connect him with the NASA team. After much searching, he finally recovered the Pathfinder buried in the Martian soil. Vincent's guess proved to be correct, but one more challenge remained. Communication would only have been possible if NASA had a device on Earth to support it. The same model of the system would have been available. Vincent immediately set out for JPL in California, because this age-old technology would be the only connection between Mark and Earth. Fortunately, the surviving model of the Pathfinder was still preserved at JPL. Vincent immediately called upon some scientists who had worked on this same Pathfinder mission years earlier. Now Vincent, the real game had begun, but whether he could save Mark or not, we'll find out later. Meanwhile, on Mars, Mark removed the Pathfinder's dead battery and connected it to his camp's power source. Luckily, it started working as soon as he connected it. As soon as he turned the Pathfinder's antenna toward Earth, an old model from JPL, which was lying with NASA, suddenly received the signal. The entire team was overjoyed when they saw the Pathfinder in action. A spacecraft they had lost contact with years ago was working again. One member began sending commands to the Pathfinder, and as soon as they did, the Pathfinder's camera on Mars automatically turned on. Seeing the Pathfinder's camera move on Mars, Mark immediately understood that the spacecraft on Earth was working. The NASA team is trying to contact him. He immediately picked up a board and wrote, "Are you receiving me?" He then created yes and no options on both sides of the board so that the person in front could answer simply by moving the camera. As soon as the JPL team saw his question, they immediately turned the camera to yes. Seeing the camera moving on Mars, Mark's hope for survival was revived. For the first time in so long, he realized he wasn't truly alone. But contact with the NASA team on Earth was still extremely slow and difficult. The distance between Mars and Earth was so great that sending a simple question and receiving a response took nearly 4 hours. The biggest problem was that Mark was the only one who could ask questions, and that too only in a yes or no format. The NASA team couldn't send him messages directly, but Mark was no less. He decided that if simple communication was possible, it could be transformed into a complete language. Mark knew that the Pathfinder's camera could rotate a full 360 degrees. Using this idea, he created a communication system. He chose the hexadecimal numbering method because letters and words could be represented by converting hexadecimal values into ASCII codes. Could be created. On Earth, Vincent and his team also placed hexadecimal symbols around Pathfinder so that messages could be exchanged through camera movements. Gradually, a common language was emerging between Mars and Earth, but this method was very slow. Even sending a simple message took a long time. So NASA scientists sent Mark some special codes. He deciphered those codes. With help, he connected his rover to the Pathfinder system. He could now send text messages directly from his computer much faster than before. NASA sent him a message informing him that the rescue operation had begun and that he would first be sent as much food and water as possible so that he could survive until the NASA team reached Mars again. Upon reading this message, a new hope arose within him. For the first time, he felt like he might actually be able to return alive. He then asked the NASA team, "Do all my crew members know whether I'm alive or not?" NASA's answer was no. Hearing this, his anger erupted as his own crew hadn't been told the truth. But now that the conversation had been over, NASA finally allowed everyone to return to Earth. They decided to share this shocking news with the crew members, and upon learning that Mark was still alive on Mars, the entire team was shocked. On one hand, they were delighted with the news of his survival, but on the other, they were also deeply saddened by the regret of having left him alone. Meanwhile, on Mars, Mark continued to send daily updates to NASA. For a while, everything went well. His potato crop was also successful, and it seemed Mark could easily spend the next few years here until NASA's next mission arrived. But fate was about to take a turn. One night, everything suddenly changed. The camp's airlock had become very weak from excessive use. As a result, it suddenly exploded with a massive blast. The blast was so powerful that Mark flew straight up like the wind. He fell far away. The fall cracked his helmet. The Martian atmosphere was so deadly that even a small hole could kill him. So he quickly taped his helmet shut and managed to get back inside his camp. As soon as he got inside, the sight that presented itself to him devastated him. The rising temperatures had destroyed his entire crop. Now he had to replant that crop again. It was nearly impossible to grow it. Watching his crops devastated before his eyes, he became terrified as he only had enough food left to last a few months. Meanwhile, on Earth, NASA began preparing to launch an emergency supply rocket for him. Everyone believed this mission would save Mark's life, but seconds after launch, the rocket exploded in midair, destroying him. Seeing his last hope slip away, he now felt certain that he would die here. With his death approaching, he sent a message to Commander Lewis, requesting that if he failed to return, his parents be told that their son had been part of a meaningful mission. Upon seeing this message, even the NASA team on Earth lost their courage. But Mark, sitting on Mars, was unfazed by anything. He decides to somehow return to Earth. Back on Earth, the entire world was watching the news of Mark's failed supply mission. Meanwhile, top scientists from China's space agency also saw this broadcast. China, in the name of humanity, decided to help NASA. They donated one of their powerful rockets to NASA to give the rescue mission another chance. Now NASA had a new ray of hope. If they failed this time too, Mark's life would be ruined forever. Meanwhile, the real entry was Rich Purnell, a brilliant astrodynamics expert. Upon arriving at NASA, he devised a plan that sounded nearly impossible, yet was scientifically genius. This strategy was later named the Rich Purnell Maneuver. His plan was to slingshot the spacecraft instead of landing it on Earth. It should be used as a propeller. This means that the spaceship would pass near Earth at high speed, take a gravity boost, and then turn directly towards Mars. This mission was very dangerous. Even the slightest mistake could have resulted in the entire crew being lost in space forever. NASA Director Rich Purnell found this plan too dangerous, so he rejected it. However, Mission Director Devan felt that this was the best way to save Mark. This could be his last chance to save him. But to avoid any further delays, he secretly shared the entire plan with all the crew members. The game now rested with the crew. They could either return safely to Earth or risk their lives and embark on another, more lengthy mission just to save their friend. After some thought, the team decided that they would never leave Mark alone and return to Earth. We will go. Meanwhile, on Mars, Mark was also busy with his work. He had to make another dangerous journey of approximately 60 days to reach another MAV already placed on Mars for the future Ares IV mission. But this was his last chance to return to Earth alive. So he began his journey by eating only the remaining potatoes he had left for several days. A dangerous and life-threatening journey of many days. Finally, he reached the MAV, but a new problem arose. The MAV needed to be made light enough to reach Mars orbit. NASA immediately ordered him to remove unnecessary components from the rocket. This meant that Mark now had to launch in an open-top rocket that looked like a makeshift machine. Meanwhile, the crewed spacecraft was in Mars orbit. Mars had already arrived, and everyone's eyes were fixed on Mark's launch. As soon as Mark launched his MAV, the rocket began to fly at a rapid speed. However, the tarpaulin covering the tip of the MAV couldn't withstand the pressure of the launch, causing it to explode. The sudden pressure caused Mark to faint. Fortunately, the MAV successfully entered Mars orbit, but once again a major problem arose. It stood in front of him. There was still a distance of approximately 68 kilometers between Hermes and Mark's spacecraft. Direct rescue from such a distance seemed impossible. Seeing this, Commander Lewis immediately ordered Hermes' sub-engines activated. The crew began using the thrusters to bring Hermes closer to the MAV at maximum speed. Meanwhile, as soon as Mark regained consciousness, his voice reached all the crew members. The entire crew was relieved to hear this. They felt they had accomplished their mission, but the danger was still far from over. There was still a significant difference in the orbital speeds of Hermes and MAV, approximately 42 meters per second. Even this small number is extremely dangerous in space. If they hadn't roughly equalized the speeds of the two spacecraft, it would have been impossible to bring Mark back safely. But another problem had arisen for Hermes. If they switched all the engines to full power again, they would not have enough fuel to return to Earth. The situation now seemed almost impossible. Then Commander Lewis made another decision. He planned to detonate a bomb in Hermes' lock so that the blast could slightly adjust the spacecraft's speed and direction. This plan was very risky, but now there was no other option but to take the risk. After the blast, Hermes came very close to Mark, but there was still a dangerous distance between them. Seeing this, Mark made the biggest decision of his life. He cut a small hole in the glove of his spacesuit, and using the pressure of the escaping air began flying through space towards Hermes. Meanwhile, Commander Lewis was also moving forward with a rope to catch him. As Mark approached her, she unfortunately couldn't catch him. But somehow Mark grabbed her rope and the two came close to each other. Finally, the crew pulled her inside their Hermes. At that moment, not only the Hermes crew, but the entire planet rejoiced. After months of surviving alone on Mars, Mark Watney finally returned to his comrades and the movie ended there. It happens. If you liked this video, please like it and subscribe to our channel.